Hello. So today we're going to talk about the election of 1948. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, Mr. G, this is so long ago. It was 68 years ago. Everyone from that time frame is either dead or they're old. And they're the people I'm honking my horn at the red light when they're trying to make a right-hand turn and they're not turning in time. And they're just wandering around in Boca Raton, wondering why don't the kids don't call, why don't the grandkids don't call, haven't I heard from my grandchildren in so long? Well, listen, greatest generation of all time in 1948. So why don't you just sit down, shut your mouths, open your ears, and listen to the election of 1948 when we elected, in my personal humble opinion, the greatest president of all time, Harry S. Truman. So that's the ending. I'm going to tell you how we get there. Now, the election 1948 takes place in, guess what? 1948, as surprising as that sounds. So we have Harry S. Truman, FDR's last vice president. Now, FDR, as you know from the previous section in the previous chapter, got to his unprecedented fourth term election, which, if you're wondering, how did FDR get so many terms as president, and then most presidents only do two. There wasn't a law or a statute set yet. It was unprecedented. George Washington did 2 terms, and then he said, hey, I'm cutting out of here. I'm going back to Mount Vernon. I'm going to go underneath my tree. I'm going to go die an old man with my wife, Martha. And he did it. And everyone just kind of said, all right, 2 terms is what Washington did. So that's what we're all due, just, in honor of Mr. Washington. Now, FDR said, hey, whoa, slow down, Mr. Washington. You didn't have the Great Depression, and you didn't have Nazis and Japanese in Pearl Harbor and World War II on your hands when this all happened. The greatest thing that George Washington faced was the Whiskey Rebellion, which will be a video soon to come, trust me. Now, the election of 1948, let's get back to it. We have Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman is the vice president for vice president for FDR, his last vice president. Now, FDR kind of keeps Harry S. Truman in the dark. He doesn't tell him about the Manhattan Project. That's the development of the atomic bombs. He doesn't tell him about any of that stuff. He doesn't tell him about the plans. He's really in the dark. And early on in FDR's 4th term, he dies. And Harry Truman hears the words, and he rushes to Eleanor Roosevelt and says, is there anything I can do to help you? And Eleanor Roosevelt basically says, no, Mr. President, is there anything that we can do to help you? You're the one that's in trouble now. So Harry S. Truman had a big load to carry on his shoulders. Now, the election in 1948 is coming around. Now, Harry S. Truman makes the decision to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan, on Hiroshima Nagasaki. We had already won in the European theater. That was done with. We already defeated Hitler. Hitler already killed himself in the bunker in Berlin. And, the Japanese were not giving up. But then we dropped these 2 atomic bombs. And basically the first one was to say, hey, you should really surrender. And the second was really this is really debated, but let's be honest. Harry S. Truman was telling Joseph Stalin, hey, look, don't mess with us. We're America. We're going to drop the second bomb and just show you how powerful we are. And people debate that, whether that was a right decision or a bad decision. Well, Harry S. Truman said he didn't lose a wink of sleep over it. So, when you die and get up there and you ask Harry Truman, what were you thinking, you can ask him that. But listen, we fast forward. Now, World War II is over. It's 1948. The election of 1948 is happening. Now, we have Thomas Dewey, he's a prosecutor from New York, Republican candidate. I'm going to skip a lot of details. He gets the candidacy. He beats everyone in the primaries. Boom. Thomas Dewey's a prosecutor from New York. He was taking out mafia and organized crime members during the bootlegging era, which you obviously already know from your previous chapters and sections, as your professors taught you. Very good job, professor and or teacher. Good job. And as I'm sure we all know about how the organized crime and the bootlegging industry rose to our mafiosa crime families and other things like that in the metropolitan areas, especially in New York with the 5 families, as I'm sure we all know. Now, we fast forward. Thomas Dewey was very, very big on prosecuting these people in the bootlegging era, and in the organized crime era in New York. Now, he's a Republican. He's very, very popular. Harry S. Truman he comes into the political scene very, very late in his life. He's a failed haberdasher. His businesses have failed. People are like, Harry who? I mean, he's a failed haberdasher from Independence, Missouri. I mean, the only way people, even my age, know what Independence, Missouri is if they've ever played Oregon Trail, because that's where you start off on when you go from Independence, Missouri to Oregon. Now, yes, failed haberdasher. Yes, businessman, not so successful. Yes, but he goes into politics. He's plain speaking. He tells it like it is. He'll tell you straight up. He won't mince words. The man even has a plaque that says the buck stops here. The man was truly a true man. Now, the people were thinking, hey, we have Thomas Dewey, prosecutor from New York City. He took down organized crime during Prohibition. Now, the Prohibition was when they outlawed alcohol, but then they brought it back in after another amendment. A big, giant, blah. But bottom line is, they had Prohibition, and then they didn't, and they probably made the right decision. Now, that brought rise, like I said before, to the organized crime. Thomas Dewey was taking care of those people left and right. He was doing amazing jobs prosecuting these mafia people and these organized crime members. Now, Harry S. Truman, not so popular. He's not really a household name. He's this failed haberdasher who took over for FDR. And yeah, he dropped a few bombs, and then he went to Key West and took a vacation and stuff like that. Which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to Key West, go to the White House. It is amazing. It is truly amazing. And Ernest Hemingway's house. But we'll get into another video about Ernest Hemingway and other American writers. Now, back to Harry Truman. He's seen as an underdog. I mean, for the first time in American history, I mean, maybe the second time in American history. I mean, let's be honest. John Adams had no shot of winning the presidency after he messed up the XYZ affair and the Alien Station Act. But let's say for the second time in American history, the incumbent, the president who was already president at the time, wasn't the favorite. He was seen as the underdog. But anyway, I digress. It seemed like America wanted Thomas Dewey, and it was so one-sided. Even the Chicago Tribune has this big famous picture of Harry Truman holding those people saying, Dewey defeats Truman. They already hedged their bets. They had their headlines ready for the next day. Fun fact, if you go to Key West, that newspaper is there, and the one he's holding in that picture, and as a Harry S. Truman buff, it is so amazing to see. Now, needless to say, if you haven't found out by now, Harry S. Truman wins the election in an amazing, miraculous, unseen turn of events. He wins the election and becomes president in 1948. Now, to give you kind of a quick fast-forwarding of Harry S. Truman's presidency, the biggest blunder is the Korean conflict. It's not a blunder in the fact that we're not doing so well. It's a blunder in the fact that he fires MacArthur and he kind of just says, hey, you can't really keep going. But if he did, it might have prevented Vietnam. But on the opposite side, Harry S. Truman's Truman Doctrine is what Ronald Reagan kind of used to win and defeat the USSR and the communists in the 1980s. So you could say that Harry S. Truman, by firing MacArthur and not letting him go past the 36th parallel during the Korean conflict, kind of messed up a little bit during that time and caused the 20-odd-something year Cold War. His doctrine and his philosophy and his factors and elements and how to defeat the communists is what Ronald Reagan used in the 1980s to actually overthrow the USSR and communism and that threat. So you can really say that Harry S. Truman was kind of, sort of, in my opinion, the most influential, most necessary president and greatest president of all American history. I mean, he dropped the bombs on Japan, told the USSR and Joseph Stalin, hey, don't mess with us. The UN formed, and we were basically the bosses of that, as we are still. And then his doctrine rebuilt Europe, and basically we used his plans during the 1980s with Ronald Reagan to win the Cold War. So you can, people sit there and say, hey, he was soft with MacArthur and the Korean conflict. But no, Harry S. Truman, failed haberdasher, late to the game on politics, quiet, but he will tell you exactly how he feels. He will tell it like it is. Probably the greatest, most influential person in Mr. G's life after Alexander Hamdog Hamilton. And, you know, to prove it, I mean, look, if you can get this book Truman by David McCullough. I mean, look at this bad boy. This man, truly an important figure in American history, not only American history, but world history. Without Harry S. Truman, who knows where we'd be. So that's the election of 1948. Harry S. Truman wins. He becomes president. During the Korean conflict, he fires MacArthur from leading the Korean conflict. That's seen as a big giant, not such a good idea on his part. He loses later on, 1952. Eisenhower becomes president, but we'll talk about that in another video. And that's really. But hey, the election 1948. Harry S. Truman comes back out of nowhere. Underdog story defined perfectly as he comes up, rises above the odds against him, and becomes president of the United States, as he well deserved. And in my opinion, he should have been reelected for a second term. But hey, that's just Mr. G's perspective on it. But look, you got the facts. You got what you need. You'll do fine on the quizzes and the exams, as long as you remember that Harry S. Truman wins the election in 1948, and that he dropped the 2 bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima and basically ended World War II. And his, the Truman Doctrine basically is what Ronald Reagan used to win the Cold War in 1989, or 1988, whatever you want. It's kind of a shady gray area at that time. So anyway, look, that's it. I'm sorry this isn't some fascinating Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson video. I'll get to those eventually. But, the election 1948, my favorite president, Harry S. Truman. Once again, product plug, Truman, David McCullough. Truly a true man. Okay, back to you, Teach.